Hello, you're watching the TelecomTV Summit on Telcos and Public Cloud. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content. A key factor behind the success of the public cloud giants is their ability to provide a standard set of services to all customers, enabling them to scale out their offerings rapidly across the globe. Yet, telcos argue that they have specific needs, often mandated by legislation. So what are these unique requirements and how can they be supported by the public cloud? Well, let's ask our guests, and I am delighted to say that joining me on the programme today are Shawn Hakl, who is Vice President of 5G Strategy at Microsoft, Mark Gilmour, who is Chief Technology Officer of ConnectiviTree Europe, and Rahul Atri, who is Consulting Analyst with Appledore Research. Hello everyone, good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in our discussion today. Firstly, I'd just like to ask, should telcos be considered a unique case? Are their needs really sufficiently different from the average enterprise customer? Shawn, you've had a background where you've been on both sides of the fence, so to speak. What's your opinion on whether or not telcos are a unique case?
Yeah, obviously I'm here today representing Microsoft, but I did spend 20 years at a large US operator. So from my perspective, when you break down the problem set, you break it down into regulatory, technology, security, et cetera. So from a technology perspective, there's a lot of excitement around sort of greenfield operators, and that's justified because it shows the art of the possible. But very practically, a lot of the operators today are what we'll call brownfield implementation, where they have the existing bases they have to support. The reality is that network functions are more complex than the typical enterprise function or application. And so as a result, there's a special need around being able to link to the underlying architecture from a performance need, right? High throughput storage, CPU pinning, specific network extensions, right? Smart NIC support, et cetera. That's just reality to support today is both virtualized and containerized network functions. So that's obviously one thing that has to happen. Another thing is telco workloads are physics bound, right? And that's not going to change anytime soon, right? I think the most cited one is the fact that the VDU has to be close to the VCU within 20 milliseconds, or sort of the VCU has to be close to the BBU, which is 20 milliseconds. And that's not going away anytime soon. And obviously there's the economics of having the user plane function located near the internet breakout. All of that begs for a hybrid response. So whatever hyperscale solution people are picking, there needs to be a hybrid solution there. From a regulatory perspective, obviously there's a lot of energy spent around what the regulatory requirements are to support telecom workloads in the cloud. And we'll continue to see those evolve, right? As people become more familiar with the technology, as they become more confident in the adoption of cloud-based models to support these workloads, I think those regulations will evolve. In the short term, we need to be able to demonstrate just good practices around, strong identity protection, zero trust networking architectures, and strong identity mechanisms, and those are all super important as well in the operator space. And so as a result, I think we'll continue to see that those capabilities evolve over time as well. So the short answer is in the near term, practically there is a need for unique capabilities in the operator space to support networking workloads.
Great, thanks very much for those comments, Shawn. And Mark, let me come straight across to you. Are your views the same? Or should we be considering telcos a unique case? Their needs are sufficiently different from those of average enterprises?
I think Shawn articulated some of the needs there really, really well, particularly when it comes to the cellular side of an operator. Of course, if we were thinking about the IT infrastructure, then sure, telcos they fit into the average enterprise, the big enterprises. So on the IT infrastructure, sure, I think that they can be considered in that space. But here we're particularly focusing on network functions, and I do believe there is whether it's a uniqueness or certainly it's more needs than how the public cloud providers have scaled. there is now the greater necessity to hone in on things such as security, to hone in on things such as reliability and resilience. And then there is, of course, the part about performance that comes into it. As you're aware, we're ConnectiviTree. We're at the other end of the network scale in terms of not dealing with access, but dealing with the international backbone network side of things. And to put our management systems and things like that, we're still a little wary of that, because how will the security, how will the control of that, how can that be secured in the public cloud? That's still the question we're asking.
Indeed, still lots of questions, and thanks very much, Mark. And Rahul, what about yourself? Because again, you come from an operator background. Now you're taking the independent analyst view of the industry. So from your perspective today, should telcos consider themselves a unique case?
I believe for the short term, yes. And I think it's good for the industry that we keep telcos as a unique case for the short time. But I don't want to just construct that around technology itself, because I think technology is the simplest part to solve. It goes through all the different three phases, like people, process, technology, and the mindset. It's underlying. It's just the same hypervisor technology. It's either a Kubernetes or OpenStack and different version of it. I believe that technology is easier to adapt to, and given if there is a closer partnership between the hyperscalers and the telco application stack and the technology provider, it's all obviously just a roadmap to consider. Also, I believe technology in terms of telcos are a little special because we keep this sandwich of three layers all together. The services, the applications, and the infrastructure, all three are dependent on each other. We might have to decouple them also to look at different aspects of it. And I think hypervisors are great places to even evolve that, because how they think about any problem is a product and a feature. And then most of the things become a standardized operating entity out or a plugin out of the box for the hyperscaler technology. So short term, yes, but I think we're reaching to a point where telcos probably would be out of box in the hyperscaler. Maybe we have seen early signs of at least the edge use cases, at least the small scale use cases. And if we work in an industry collaboratively, there's a fair bit of understanding and collaborative natures. We will reach to a point where it will become one such application stack. There's still some of the applications like a VDU or a UPF, which requires a certain amount of little more stickiness to the infrastructure layer, going beyond into the plugins of CNI, CIDs, and a lot storage capacities, mostly on real-time kernel. But I think these are problems which, once solved, could become the standard of offerings out of the platforms.
Great, thanks so much, Rahul. Very great range of views there on this opening question about whether telco should be considered as a unique case. But I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into maybe what some of these unique requirements are. And you've covered a number of them already. But Rahul, let me come straight back to you. You were saying that it shouldn't just be about the technology side, but are there any other requirements, network-related requirements, that impact their public cloud decisions that we can identify now?
A lot of them. Practically, it varies from the kind of application we are onboarding. And it all starts with onboarding. How do you onboard the application? Are there standard templates? Are you using Helm charts, heat templates, or even the lifecycle management policies around it? If you see, when you onboard an application, how do you define the template of requirement of resources become very critical. How do you define the policies around scaling out and scaling in both? How do you leverage the infrastructure and platform services like databases, storage, and a lot of things? And then even to the layer of application specificity in terms of network plugins, let's say multiple NICs, in terms of infrastructure requirements of real-time kernel, huge pages, DPDK, SRV. Although these are typically not cloud-native application stack requirements, but we are taking that leap of faith and journey towards being cloud-native network functions in telecom. So I think if we are able to define the requirements of applications, in terms of templates, and then figuring out all the network function layers across the network and what are the common set of requirements, what are the special kind of requirements, along with the topology and architecture of the network, to say every time we deploy a far edge with a VDU or let's say a UPF kind of functionality, or in fact going forward, the AR VR kind of use cases where we'll require GPU capability, this is the template for the edge use case. When we deploy applications in the central data center, these are the 2 or 3 different templates for a cluster requirement. If we start thinking from that mindset, and that's why I believe that it's not only technology, but how do you think about solving the lifecycle problem, and then going forward, how do you design your policies around how do we scale? It's not only the number of sessions, it's not only the CPU capacity reaching out, it's not only the number of users attaching to the network, but probably a lot more, because some of your application would be federated across multiple clusters at different locations at edge, regional, and a central data center, maybe across multiple clusters or a same cluster. So there are all these things which goes together in terms of how your applications are architected, what capabilities they're leveraging, and then what kind of lifecycle management you want to do. And on top of it, what kind of organization you have. People do talk about DevOps and SREs all the time, but are you a build versus managed services organization going forward? Do you like to do hands dirty? And then how is your orchestration policies? How are your architecture defined in terms of management system? Too many management system, too many layers. And then how do you probably define all these through as a process end to end, not only design deployment, but across how do you do operations and what kind of testing you did when services, virtual machines, containers, hardware failure happens, and what happens immediately after that. So if it's all plugged together, I think it's more of, don't think that of this is a day 0 problem or day 1 problem. It walks through to the day end. And if you define these in a right process, in a right sense, and tested it out, I think then only you'll be able to reap the benefits which come with the cloud technology.
Rahul, thanks very much indeed for that. So much to consider, and it all seems to stem from those 3 interconnected layers you mentioned earlier. Mark, you wanted to come in with some comments on this question.
Yeah, I think just as I was listening to Rahul there, it made me think, actually, a lot of those applications, a lot of those use cases and things, it was implementing cloud technology, which the public cloud providers are absolutely skilled in, but in more of a private network environment. So, as we're going through those use cases, would you put all of those into the public cloud or utilize that same technology set, the cloud technology set, but more in a private setting? And I think that's what we're seeing more of, that it's turning to the public cloud providers because of their expertise to deliver cloud-based infrastructure that's not necessarily public.
Thank you, Mark. And Shawn, earlier you gave us a list of several specific requirements that are unique to telcos, but you'd like to come in and add some further thoughts here.
Yeah, just real quick. I think it's super important, the difference between sort of the needs of the core network versus the needs of the enterprise edge, right? On the enterprise edge, I think it just makes a lot of sense for the operators to align with the architectures that are being put out there for enterprise consumption, right? Because that's how you get to scale. That's the technology they want to capture. Sort of just trying to extend out the way that work is done in the public network to the edge is probably not necessary. We're not seeing that as being a massively successful approach. So, and then on the flip side, I think there is a recognition that the needs of the core network are unique. We do know that you can run. We have a press release with MTN where they've run our 5G SA core on the public cloud, but whether that'll work in all circumstances or cloud, or you have to get to a more hybrid model, which I ultimately think is where things are moving from within public cloud. So when we talk about this, I think it's important to reflect the fact that hybrid doesn't just mean enterprise. In other words, and I think people should align more with enterprise deployments from a cost point and a distribution point perspective. And then hybrid does apply equally for the macro network in terms of your ability to distribute functionality both closer to the edge to support core networking workloads, as well as leveraging the platform capabilities that are in the public cloud, right? You're not going to get to this vision of AI operations without engaging with cloud-based services to do that. And so I think it's important that people think of it that way.
Great. Thanks very much for those comments, Shawn. And Rahul, let me come straight back to you for some final comments on this question.
I think I have heard one more thing on public versus hybrid approach. I think it's also important to see that aspect as the kind of strategy we want to take forward. Again, public clouds being deployed as private, it's also one of the flavors, and obviously people are talking more and more about it. That's also important that we think about regulatory aspects, security aspects of not only the network and network function services, but also access. And as we're moving more and more toward network as a service, open API is exposing network for the end use cases to be delivered for let's say the APIs which will be consumed by developers or partner ecosystem. It become more and more important that along with the cloud deployment strategies, what kind of orchestration engine you run on top of it to make sure that we leverage best out of it. And that also, as we were discussing, that depends on the kind of application stacks, and then, to be very honest, I feel that enterprise stacks or the enterprise applications for at least the telcos go hand in hand with the network function nowadays, because it's gonna converge into a network as a service or more use cases driven than the connectivity driven future of telecom approach.
Okay, interesting. Thanks, Rahul, for those comments. Well, look, let's move on a little bit, because I want to delve into some of the architectures now, if you can. Are there some public cloud architectures that are perhaps a better fit for telcos and their requirements than others? And specifically, we're talking about network and operation side of telcos here, perhaps more suited to the needs of 5G. Shawn, I guess it's a bit obvious, but I think I'm going to come across to you first, if I may, for some responses to this particular question.
Yeah, I may be a bit biased in my response, but I'll tell you what I think are the important elements of the approach that I think will yield the best success. First of all, it's just a fundamental acceptance of hybrid architectures being important to the network workloads. And so it can't just be a fast on-ramp to public cloud. The reality is that it's going to be a hybrid model for the foreseeable future. Similarly, we have Operator Nexus, which is a capability that offers a form factor that works at the far edge, the near edge, and in the cloud itself, that offers a consistent platform across all that experience it, making it possible for operators to create composable networks. In other words, based on their geography, their security needs, and the requirements of the individual applications, that you can compose the network across a platform experience that's consistent across the board. So I think that's important. I think the amount of telco DNA that a hyperscaler has, again, the needs of the industry are unique. The needs of the technology are unique. Having people that have the engineering background where they're not learning it from you, but in fact have in-house capabilities is important. I think to our end-to-end story. So that's, from my perspective, that's what's going to be super important for people to be successful. Exposing all of that is sort of in an API-first cloud-native way, so that you can integrate easily into the OSS and BSS layers of the stack. And then again, looking for those initial reference cases. I talked earlier about there's a lot of excitement around the greenfield operators, and there should be, because they provide the art of the possible. Practically, these deployments aren't going to get to scale so they can support the needs of established operators with tens of millions of subscribers. And I believe we've brought the lessons learned in from our experience of deploying AT&T's 5G SA core on Azure, and again on Azure in a hybrid model, which I think is going to be reflective of where most people go with the platform. And so those lessons learned, the operational processes, the capabilities of handing control back to the operator in the event of a critical national infrastructure challenge, are all super important aspects of the platform. And so my belief is that those capabilities, that uniformity of deployment, true hybrid architecture support, and a deep understanding of those operator requirements, as well as having the telco engineering capabilities on staff, will make an important difference to people's experience moving to the public cloud.
Thanks, Shawn. So it's not just the architecture, it's the people behind it, it's the expertise that they bring and apply whilst doing so. Rahul, what about you? Do you see certain public cloud architectures as being a better fit for telcos, and why?
I think again, I'll come back to the kind of use cases and applications they're trying to pull in. For example, Shawn was mentioning the kind of application which requires peaks. For example, when you're running your AI models, you're doing data normalization, enrichment, and making insight out of it perfectly to move into public cloud. Why do you want to have resources blocked in all the time when you're using them some of the time? We think about all the data lake, all the kind of possibilities where you want to do lot of management processes for time being. Great. And I think the one thing which I love about the hyperscalers model is the standardization and repeatability aspect of it. So once you have solved this problem once, you don't tend to repeat, and that comes into as a product capabilities. And the other part of art of possibility here is how easy it gets to manage things because of the marketplace or the kind of application stack or the UX they have built in. Everything seems to be a workflow or a task, which we just go to the console. If you're a Linux expert, go to CLI mode, but you just have to make few clicks and you're on. And if you're an engineer, you better have the data into your accessibility ranges, and then you want to run some of the experimentation on the data and make sure that the model is good to go to production. So the agility part of it, the elasticity and the repeatability aspect of it makes it a lot more easier for people to get onboarded. Ultimately, as we are saying, there are different kind of models, different kind of architectures, maybe different kind of deployment engines at where you're deploying, what kind of application deploying. But all in all, it gets you a possibility where you can think about a runtime rather than pre-planning and reconfiguration, though it also requires your application architecture to be that sort. We have seen places where people have started talking about the ROI aspects of cloud. I think it's the people who kind of over-dimension the application stack or the architecture have not reached to that point of certainty of cloud nativeness where we have to take these trade-offs. And I think we're slowly reaching there.
Well, Rahul, thanks very much for those comments. And I'd like to follow up with a question to you. And it's a related question, but can we flip this and look at it a different way? Are there any unique capabilities of the public cloud that telcos could and should utilize with respect to their own network workloads?
Yes, a lot of them. I look at it from the life cycle of the entirety. So if you think about when you're deploying a service, there is Artifactory, there is a service designer, there is a possibility to pull in things together, test it out, and create different environments on the runtime. And then obviously there's a deployment engine to automate that. You can pull in any APIs. You can have your own template. You can even take the image from a Linux to Ubuntu to different flavors. You can deploy and then configure automation engine to deploy the application. You can write your own CI/CD pipelines. You can even observe it from something like an observability framework, pull out the telemetries out of the application stack in an even infrastructure stack, and then also define the policies to do the runtime lifecycle management of healing, scaling, and whatnot. Even it gives you now the possibility to see what kind of resources being utilized at what time, how much is the ROI versus the resiliency factor, because you just don't want to pre-configure resources and wait for bad things to happen. Along with that, I think the possibility of active deployments is a great way to look forward, because we're reaching to our database services where it is possible to have applications on active deployments rather than only active standby kind of model. We also have possibilities now to define application where you want to probably use public cloud for DR, if not for activities. So you can have this as an disaster recovery platform, much more safer than the data centers the operators own today, based on the geography part of it. So I think, and then the last part is practices. The platforms are made across to make sure that there is transparency. You can pull out events transparently, logs, and make sure you want to go deeper into it and manage the lifecycle on your own if you are of that sorts. And I think the culture aspect of how the platforms are being developed, managed, and the art of possibilities when you also go into the console of the hyperscalers. Along with that, there are a lot of things which come by default: database as a service, data lake as a service, ML pipelines which could be integrated. And it's not that the telcos cannot do on their own on a private network or a private data center. It's just that the whole possibility of having these toolkits at your hand always present makes it a little more easier to do it. We as in culture in telecoms are silos, different platform, different technologies, and then you kind of try to integrate them into creating transformational journey. I think with Hyperscaler, the culture part was always different. As I was mentioning earlier, every problem for them is a product or a feature. And when you go from that product mindset, repeatability and standardization becomes a key. You always looked at, if I have a new use case, can my older product solve that? If that is the case, you don't build a new one, you just add on a feature on that. Rather than the legacy approach of buying a new platform, buying multiple management things, or buying multiple systems. So I look at it holistically, and I feel there's a lot to add and a lot to learn and collaborate as an industry across the board with telcos and hyperscalers.
Great, thanks very much, Rahul. As you say, there's a lot of possibilities there. Shawn, I'll come to you in a second, but I just want to go to Mark first. And Mark, I don't want this to sound flippant, but it's almost like a child in a toy shop. There seems to be a sort of wide-eyed wonder at the possibilities and the opportunities out there. Is there so many capabilities out there in the public cloud that telcos could utilize?
I think Rahul did a great job of listing that kind of, for a CTO, for that kind of sweet shot sort of, or look at all of these things we could do. And I think one that really jumped out for me was the DR, sort of the disaster recovery, that sort of dynamic, utilization or dynamic reconfiguration that becomes a more static environment. That's something that the public cloud can offer, and working in conjunction with a hybrid or a privately owned network is a really interesting one. But a lot of those use cases require, and we've talked about it, a mindset change. A development change within telcos, for sure. But then there is also the discussion point around our ROI costs. A lot of these things, you look at them and they go, this would be fantastic. The question then becomes is, can I monetize on that, or does it bring value into the services that I offer as an operator? So I think that becomes part of the reality check of what can and can't be done, or what can be done, and is the reward worth the potential risks of public cloud?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, it's you have to want it, and then you've also got to work out if you can afford it. Thanks for those comments. Nicely put. Shawn, what about you? Are you seeing unique capabilities in the public cloud that telcos should be utilizing, and they should get this positive mindset, and they should delve deep and go for it?
Yeah, obviously the most recent item that people are excited about is AI. Obviously, there was a lot of activity in the recent weeks in terms of integration there, and so that's bringing the capabilities of GPT technology into the networking environment, being able to use GPT technology to proactively build code that queries the network information, for example, or being able to use the Copilot capabilities to build further automation to extend out the integration across the footprint is from a timing basis, that's the most recent conversation. Obviously, I think Rahul did a great job of listing out all the areas: observability, DevOps, AI, automation, and security features that come with cloud-based services. The other important aspect is that with a platform-based solution, you're not just designing it once and then you're stuck with an implementation that you leave to rust in place over the next 5 to 7 years. In fact, hundreds of features are being developed, scaled out through hundreds of thousands of enterprises, and can be delivered back to the operator so that they're continuously have an evergreen platform. I think that's another important aspect that gets missed when we have the public cloud discussion. Another area that both of the previous speakers had touched on was the ROI aspect. And we work closely with the third-party analyst organization to look at the implementations we have right now, and we can demonstrate a 36 to 38% savings of using a public cloud-based solution versus sort of the more traditional private cloud implementations that are out there. And to Rahul's point about where the efficiency come from, that includes sort of a 58% OpEx savings that comes from automation, simplification, and standardization. So, the facts back up very strongly sort of Rahul's suppositions about of where the benefit lies in real numbers. in terms of monetization, another thing that I learned when I was at a tier one operator in the US was that, leveraging the partner ecosystem of the hyperscalers as you look at monetizing these new services, as you look at building out network APIs where you can expose network as a service, as you build out edge computing and bringing in application and ISV partners to take advantage of that capability. Microsoft has a partner ecosystem of over 68,000 partners. We would love to expose the capabilities as the operators make them available to that group of ISVs and partners so that the operators themselves have a better shot at monetization. I have personal experience with sort of exposing my IoT platform in my previous role up to the hyperscale developer community, and it was a set of people we didn't touch and is expensive to build. And so that combined capability, right, bringing my IoT users together with that developer community, created a lot of solutions with a lot of value. And I think that people will see that benefit come out of, and we're seeing people with that now have that benefit come out of the partnership between ourselves and the operators.
Oh, very interesting. Thanks very much, Shawn. And before we move on, I'll quickly go back across to Rahul for some wrap-up comments on this question.
I like the point which Shawn mentioned. I guess there are possibilities to uplift the stack whenever there's a need, rather than to stick around with one kind of service forever. The other part is, and which happens to a lot of things when we are talking about software and software as a service, and a lot of services which can be runtime spin-off on the cloud. It's not that the hyperscaler clouds and the ecosystem or the application would solve every problem on day zero. It's the organization also and the people working on and then figuring out, like Mark was just mentioning, that what makes sense for my organization, what makes sense for my kind of applications, and what makes sense for the ecosystem we work with. Probably not all the system makes sense. Probably some of them make sense. Probably some of them make sense for initial 6 months, and then we can let it go because our organization, our tools have reached to a capacity or a capability. Maybe the initial application deployment, when it is lesser stable or a new stack, we need extra elasticity or extra resiliency. We'll deploy them maybe a 3x kind of deployment so the service outages doesn't happen. But as we grow and understand the possibilities and stability of our environment, we can reduce the resiliency. We can use our own observability stack. We can even deploy our own ELK stack, or we can leverage the observability which comes from the hyperscaler. So the possibility to have the mindset shift, or possibilities to do things runtime and as a subscription model also is one of the factors which would be leveraged. And as you grow as an organization, you may choose to keep the tools or let it go. I think that's another great point which adds to the capability.
Great, thanks very much. And this all leads very nicely to a final question for now, and that is, given the special telco requirements that we've been discussing today, should the public cloud providers do more to keep reassuring telcos of the validity of this approach, or should telcos just stop worrying and get on with it now? Mark, let me come to you first, because you did touch on the fact that it does also require a mindset change, and it also has to be a viable decision here that telcos go down. So what are your thoughts as to what telcos should now do?
Yeah, I think the public cloud providers have actually done a good job in the last, if I think back the last 5-6 years, of really trying to understand the telco environment and the telco space much better. I mean, we're getting people like Shawn, for example, that are moving from the telco world into the hyperscaler world, and he's not the only one. There's several in that case, and I think that really helps understand the landscape in telco, and then helps to bring that trust along, to bring those that are still in the telco environment across and into help with that mindset change. I think one of the real strong advantages really is the partnership angle, because not all of the telco network workloads I believe are suitable for the public cloud for many of the reasons we've discussed. I think security plays a big part. However, the applications, the services, the development piece that we talk about with telecom providers, to really make their way to to their end customers and to improve that use case rather than technology-driven discussion. I think that's where we see a good relationship or a good development happening with the public cloud providers. I think that's kind of taking the question in a slightly different direction about just workloads onto the public cloud, but certainly working with those the public cloud providers and their myriad of businesses that they do in that, I think is really powerful. And there's still work to be done. We can see in industry that that trust and that partnership isn't ubiquitous across the piece, and I think that's a shame. But I think that's where there is good work being done. So I don't necessarily believe that telcos should just kind of shut up and get on with it, because I think they're valid. It's valid. They know this space. We know this space. We know how to provide resilient, robust network infrastructure. And then it's how that infrastructure then provides the applications, the use cases, the capabilities that the end users, whether that's consumer or enterprise, then need and desire. And so that's, I think, where the partnership works or has much more meaning to it and is much broader than just putting telco workloads into the public cloud.
Great. Thanks very much, Mark. And Rahul, do telcos need more convincing or do they have sufficient information now to be able to make an informed choice to move on?
I'm not sure. I don't know how to put it more nicely, but I think there are two kind of problems which we have right now to tackle to. I guess we as an industry solve the same problem multiple times, and everyone wants to solve in their own way. Everyone is working on cloud layer, everyone is working on orchestration layer, and everyone is working on figuring out what the right cloud strategy is. That includes application provider, that includes hyperscalers, and that includes sometimes even operators as well. I guess we like Mark was saying, it's more on the partnership and co-ownership kind of model. Maybe if the hyperscalers are looking into it already as a roadmap, but do we not? There's still the boundaries I was talking about earlier in terms of hyperscaler reaching out and say, yeah, we provide platform services. It's your application probably which needs a change in the architecture or figuring out how to be deployed in the right cloud environment with right assurance. And then the availability KPIs and the service impact is left to the operator. And ultimately, operator is owning the liability of the services and customers. How does it become a complete box? Because I feel when we have multiple partners, it's great innovation. You come to a conclusion. You build great products. Innovation happens all the time. You get the best of the lot because you all come to a common success points and the end points. But also the ownership kind of falls through and accountability falls through. So I think if we are able to solve this challenge and figure out how this 3 layers or 4 layers could become a co-ownership of everyone. Not only speaking of the numbers of 5 nines on the infrastructure layer, 5 nines on the services, 5 nines on application, but we know the application architecture are taking time or they will take time to be the cloud native one. We know that cloud is becoming more and more real. And I think the only thing which is stopping, we obviously know the greenfield are jumping onto it, and then we see successful deployments even for the most complex workloads. But for the brownfields, I think most of the time when I talk to operators, they're like, I have 2 approaches. Do I go with the application provider, their cloud and their orchestration end-to-end? Or do I take a risk and say, I'm going to own my cloud network. I'm going to own the application lifecycle, and the application provider kind of help me with your application software. But if we make it more successful, more flexible, and help people solve this problem end-to-end, and behave more like partners to say, yeah, if something happens, we all are responsible rather than each one of us for a separate thing. And Mr. Customer, you own the customer liabilities and services outage and regulatory problems. We are just cloud or application. I think that's the only thing which we need to solve as an industry and ecosystem and partnership together. Yeah, along with the mindset and evolving to the newer network types and technology. I think if we are able to solve that, we're pretty much there.
Great, thanks, Rahul. And Mark, let's come across to you again for some additional comments before we close the show. And then, of course, we'll go across to Shawn as well. But Mark first.
Well, I was going to just throw in a curveball for a moment and say, the interesting part then is signing up to a ecosystem or a provider. We have a lot of talk in the industry about monopolies or duopolies and virtualization to try and break that, and open standards and things like that. But then we're some way away from being able to truly have a consistent multi-cloud experience. So let me just throw that one in there for maybe the topic of another discussion. But I think that becomes a challenge for us as operators as well, to how do we handle that strategically wise?
Excellent, Mark. Thanks for that. And just let our viewers know that tomorrow on the summit, we are having a discussion on multi-cloud. So hopefully we'll get some answers tomorrow on that one. And Shawn, let's head back across to you for some final comments for this session.
There's two real questions that people address. Can you move your workloads to the cloud? And should you move the workloads to the cloud? From a can you perspective, listen, it's early days in terms of reference use cases. We'd like to point out that I've got tens of thousands of cores for the Azure Nexus solution deployed at AT&T, supporting millions of subs. So the answer is can you, is we believe we have some strong reference cases that show the art of the possible. But more important, I think the question is, should you? And as we talk to operators around the world, there's two key questions that come at the C level, which is how do I fundamentally reduce my cost structure, given that the industry has entered a sort of a new phase in terms of growth? And where can I find ways to monetize the massive investments I'm making, either in fiber deployments and or with the 5G spectrum purchases and the 5G rollout? And until you come up with a new set of tools, until you come up with a new way of doing things, you're going to continue to see incremental progression in terms of the innovation on services. Without sort of a more open infrastructure and without leveraging the capabilities that come where most of the software's development is happening, you're not going to see that innovation come in. And that's the innovation that's going to drive out not incremental, but stepwise improvements in efficiency, whether it's leveraging AI to improve spectral efficiency, whether it's leveraging next-gen DevOps practices to drive new services in a faster time to market, whether it's leveraging the power of AI and automation to sort of move to a true zero-touch provisioning, self-defending networks, that vision of Shawn that people, self-optimizing networks that people have, is not, will go better if it leverages the infrastructure that supports hundreds of thousands of enterprises, not a few hundred operators. And so you're leveraging for a much bigger innovation pool. And similarly, there's a large set of ecosystems out there today where people are creating value in software and services that sit above the network. Tapping in and tying into that will be critical as we look for the next generation of services. And so from a should you perspective, I strongly believe, and that's the reason I moved from an operator to the hyperscaler, is that's where the next generation innovation is going to come. And it's really, as operators think through, they should be very aware of what their control points are, where they create value, what's important to them, and how they're going to monetize. At the same time, they shouldn't be blind to the fact that the opportunity for stepwise improvement versus incremental improvement lies in sort of adopting a new approach and integrating these technologies into the network itself.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shawn. And should you is such a great way of looking at this. Well, we have to leave it there because we are out of time. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part in our discussion today and sharing all of your views. Now, if you're watching this on day one of our Telcos and Public Cloud Summit, then please do send us your questions and we'll answer them in our live Q&A show, which is coming up very soon. And don't forget to view the other panel discussions and keynote interviews in this year's event. For now, though, thanks for watching and goodbye.